Hey everybody, what's going on? Terry here. Hope you're really having a fantastic day. Welcome back to the channel. And as you can see, I'm not using my uh, mirrorless camera I use for our webcam, my A6000. I'm actually using my tried and true 77D to record this. It feels so good to actually have this camera back out in the wild. It feels so good to use it again. I really missed it. I really did. But folks, more importantly right now, today we're going to talk about a couple things that I promised you all I would talk about on my Instagram page, my stories, about some camera basic fundamentals here and everything for using a DSLR or a mirrorless camera to use as a webcam. Like, your shutter speed, aperture, frame rate, all that kind of stuff, okay? I'm going to really talk about some basic things here, and I'm not going to get too technical because there are a lot more qualified people here on YouTube to talk about like actual camera basics, you know what I mean? But this is more of a basic DSLR mirrorless camera guide tutorial to use as a webcam, okay? Not to go out and do action photography, wildlife photography, videography, that kind of stuff here, okay? So whenever it comes to the type of camera you want to use, you're going to either use a mirrorless camera or a big bulky body DSLR. And the thing with that there is that the SLR inside of a DSLR or even the old film SLRs is that it stands for single lens reflex. And all that means is that whenever you look inside of the eyepiece, the viewfinder, you are looking down onto a mirror that then looks out the lens so you can see what you are trying to capture in said video or said photo. And then whenever you hit the shutter button all the way down, that mirror flips up to reveal the shutter, and then the shutter opens up to reveal the lens, then it closes, and that takes the photo or video, you know what I mean? And a mirrorless camera does not have that type of mirror in front of the shutter. Folks, for real, the shutter is either directly in front of the camera on the camera body itself, or it's actually built onto the back of the lens. Whenever you hit that button, the shutter will then open and close like that, you know what I mean? But on a mirrorless camera, again though folks, it does not have a mirror, so therefore that's why it's called a mirrorless camera, in case y'all were wondering here, okay? Now there are two other types of things you can look for whenever you're looking for a mirrorless camera or a DSLR like what I'm shooting on here, and that is a full frame or a crop sensor. Some benefits of a full frame sensor are that, again, it's a much bigger physical size, so therefore you can get a lot more detail, a lot more natural depth of field, or how smooth everything looks behind a subject. Matter of fact, folks, if you take the same photo twice, one with a crop sensor and one with a full frame censored camera, you will notice that the bokeh or the blurred background behind your subject on the full frame will look a little bit more smooth and, or for lack of better words here, dramatic, you know what I mean? But the thing that's really nice about a crop sensor though is that, one, they are a hell of a lot cheaper to buy. Some full frame cameras out there for just the bodies alone can be $5,000 plus, you know what I mean? So again, just the body by itself, not the little starter kit to where it gives you the camera body plus a little kit lens like what I'm using here or anything. Same thing for my A6000 here from Sony. So like just the body by themselves can cost, multi-$1,000, sometimes over 10 grand if you're getting the really high-end stuff, you know what I mean? That's very unprofessional. My phone's not on vibrate. I do apologize, folks. There we go. So back into it here, shall we? So some benefits about a crop sensor is that they are a lot more affordable by a long shot, especially if you get someone like the used market or some that are a few years old. That last point could be the same for a full frame as well, but in my humble opinion, the full frame is more of a professional setup, you know what I mean? And unless you already have one for a photography thing or videography thing that you do on the side already, you really don't need to spend that kind of money for a streaming setup, in my humble opinion, you know what I mean? So again, crop censored cameras, 9 times out of 10, they're a little bit cheaper. Whenever you put a lens on top of a crop sensor, you will automatically have a little bit of punch in, so you got to sort of kind of take that into account as well. And why is that a benefit? Well, let's say that you're, again, this isn't a wildlife photography style tutorial here or anything, but let's say you're out on an African safari or something, right? And you're like, oh wow, there is a huge elephant out there in the distance. I really want to get a good shot of that. Well, the thing with the zoom lens, which you would normally have here, is if you put that on a full frame sensor, that lens will stop at whatever the max focal length it is. Like let's say you got a 300 millimeter lens on there or something, right? It will stop at 300 millimeters on that full frame sensor. But if you put that same huge lens on a crop sensor, you will have a crop factor of about 1.58, but we always round that up to about 1.6. So that would mean here, folks, let me do a little bit of math here, just real quick here, calculator. Okay, so if you do 300 times 1.6, that 300 millimeter focal length lens actually becomes around 500 or 480 millimeters. You know what I mean? So you would be able to get a little bit farther reach out of that same size lens that you would put on that full frame sensor, okay? Now, why am I telling you this? Well, for this reason right here, okay, folks? This next part, we're going to talk about lenses a little bit here, okay? I'm going to talk about some lens choice here. Now, there are two types of lenses for streaming that you really want to take a look at, okay? You want to take a look at a zoom lens, which is what I have right here, folks, or what's also called a prime lens. And what is a prime lens? Well, think of a prime lens as more of a fixed focal length. Like, they will always be 35 millimeter. They will always be 50 millimeter. They will always be insert number you want here. Like, you can't change the focal length by adjusting the barrel like this here, okay? Like, a prime lens will always and forever be one focal length. But again, if you're putting a prime lens on a crop sensor, you're going to have a little bit of punch in, you know what I mean? So a 50 millimeter lens is going to be about a 75-ish, somewhere in there, you know what I mean? So keep that there in mind. Now, why do I say keep that there in mind? Well, for example here, folks, right now, my A6000 from Sony that I use via the Camlink 4K to act as a webcam here, it is about, whenever I'm sitting here at my desk streaming, I would say it's about 3 feet away, right? So because of that, I have my 16 to 50 millimeter kit lens on there, and I leave it at 16 millimeters. Why? Well, that is because whenever I have that lens on that body, there is a 1.6 crop in there. So that 16 millimeter lens is technically acting like about a 25 millimeter lens, okay? So whenever you put that kind of lens on there, you have to account for how far you want the camera to be away from you, and also if you want to maybe open up the aperture a little bit to let in a lot more light, because the cool thing about a prime lens, folks, is that they are 9 times out of 10 a lot faster. You can run them a lot faster. And speaking of that, horrible segue here, but we're going to go right into Aperture here, okay? Now, the cool thing about Aperture, folks, is just what it sounds like, okay? As I just said a second ago, it allows you to open up the lens to allow more light onto the sensor, to get that nice blurry background behind you if the camera or lens is close enough to you, or if you're in a little bit darker environment that you might be filming or doing your stream stuff in, it will allow you to get more light onto that sensor to make it look the best it possibly can. But there is one little drawback you having a very, very fast lens. Like right now, I have a 50 millimeter portrait lens I always use, again, for portrait shots or stuff like that there, you know, and I can open it up all the way to f1.8, and that's just fine. But the thing you have to really take a look at and keep in mind of here whenever you have a fast lens like that is that whenever you open it up that fast or that big, sometimes your plane of focus is actually extremely narrow. And what do I mean? Well, whenever you open up a lens that big and you're letting so much light in, you are really opening yourselves up to a lot of focus hunting if your camera has really good autofocus, because sometimes whenever you open up a lens that big, it might make the lens and camera focus a little bit slower because there's so much data being fed to the sensor and everything, you know what I mean? So your plane of focus, what I mean is that if you sit right here, let's say f1.8 or 1.4 even, you might be nice and in focus. Like right now, I'm nice, sharp, tacked in focus here, but if I had a really, really fast lens with a really, really wide aperture, the center of my face might be in focus, but everything else, like even other parts of my face, might be very soft or out of focus, and then right behind me will be completely, you know, bokeh blurred out, you know what I mean? But the whole thing about a plane of focus is that whenever you have a lens opened up that wide, if you move even a centimeter back or a centimeter forward, you actually might go out of focus. And the problem with that is that if you have an autofocusing camera, it actually might constantly try to pull focus to the point to where you can move back, it might try to pull focus there, but by the time it has focus pulled back here, you lean forward again, so it's constantly trying to look for you, constantly trying to look for that eye, for your eye to do focus with, you know what I mean? So whenever it comes to streaming, I always tell people to go as low as like f2.4, possibly f 1.8. But anything lower than that, though, that's when you got to be mindful of opening it up too much and really kind of looking a little fuzzy or not as sharp as you can be here, okay? Now, the next thing we're going to talk about real quick here, folks, is your frame rate. Not going to spend a lot of time on that there because it literally is exactly what it sounds like. The frame rate for a camera setting here is how many frames are written to memory or sent out to your OBS software, XSplit, Slavs, whatever you might use per second, okay? So today's standards are 24, 30, and the wonderful 60 for that nice buttery smooth frame rate that you all are seeing right here, okay? But in case you all are wondering here, a little bit of fun fact for you. The reason why we still to this day use 24 frames per second as the cinematic film look for a frame rate is because back whenever we first went from black and white no sound photos to from black and white no sound video movies to movies with sound and everything, it was really awkward to listen to speech and have such a laggy, slow frame rate video. So they thought, well, hey, let's try a higher frame rate. So they went from 16 to 18. That was better, but still not quite. And then they went up to 24 frames per second, and that's where they found that the audio and video looked and sounded good together to match up. And 24 frames per second also gave you a really natural motion blur look. You know what I mean? So that's the reason why we still, even in today's, all digital everything with cameras shooting 8K plus now, huge sensors, super 35s, like as big as your face. That's actually a lie, but just go with it here, okay? Like huge monstrous sensors, 8K 24 frames per second, because why? It's cinematic AF, okay? But here's the thing too, okay, folks? Now, whenever we're talking about frame rate, we're going to go into another little segue here. You also got to take into your shutter speed to account here, okay? And for your shutter speed, you're going to either hear it one of two ways. As I just said it, your shutter speed or shutter angle. It means the exact same thing, okay? Because whenever you're talking about your shutter speed or shutter angle, again, whatever you want to call it here, you always want to follow the rule of the 180-degree shutter rule. In other words, folks, very simple here. Whatever frame rate you are shooting at, you want to use double the shutter speed, okay? So like right now, I am shooting at 1080p, 60 frames per second. So my shutter speed is 125th of a second, or 1/125. If you shoot at 30 frames per second, you're going to do 1/60 or 1/60th of a second. Or if you shoot at 24 frames per second, there isn't a 48 for a shutter speed, or 1/48 or 1/48th of a second. So what you got to do is you got to go up to 1/50th of a second, okay, or 1/50, okay? Now the cool thing about a lot of cinema cameras out there is that they actually have different types of modes, if you want to call it that, for shutter speed. You can either have it display the shutter speed to where you can change your shutter speed manually, or you can just tell it to use the actual shutter angle to where it will automatically use the shutter speed that is double the frame rate you are shooting at. So therefore, you don't even have to think about it. You can just set the camera. Oh yeah, I want to shoot this for slow motion. I want to shoot this here at 240 frames per second at 1080p, and the camera will automatically know, okay, so I should shoot at a shutter speed of around 500, you know what I mean, or 500ths of a second, you know what I mean, and it will automatically do the calculation and set that setting up for you. Okay, now, are there times to where you might want to use a longer shutter speed? Well, yeah, if you want to, go right ahead. But again, this is streaming, okay? And again, this is not a photography or a videography tutorial by any means. It's how to use basic camera settings to get a good quality stream here on Twitch, Mixer, YouTube, wherever, okay? So for the sake of this type of thing here, for this type of application, go ahead and just use the shutter speed that is double your frame rate here, okay? Now, the whole thing with ISO is that I always tell people to not leave it on auto, because sometimes it can be very sporadic, if that makes sense here, okay? So like the thing with ISO is that it literally just means how sensitive your sensor is to light, you know what I mean? So whenever you have it set to auto, let's say you're filming with drapes behind you or something in front of a window and you have an air duct there for your heating or air conditioning. and it kicks on and it makes the blinds or shade move a little bit, and that lets the sun pour in behind you while your camera's like, oh crap, I have to overcompensate for that. So it will lower the ISO to compensate for the bright light behind you, making the brighter parts of the video or image look better, but it will make you look completely like you're in the shadows, you know what I mean? So what I always tell people to do for your ISO is to keep it down as low as you possibly can, especially if you have a good lighting setup. Like right here, folks, I have one key light and one fill light here next to me. So right now my ISO is about 1600, and a matter of fact, in post for you guys, I might take it back down a little bit more to darken it up to give it more of a moody vibe, because that's just the kind of videos I like to put out, you know what I mean? But other than that though, folks, again, keep the ISO down as low as you possibly can. If you have a good mirrorless camera, and I only say that because for some reason it seems like a lot of big body DSLRs, they, for whatever reason these days, don't really seem to do a lot of good in darker environments. Like, Sony, I know for a fact, they are, in my opinion, one of the leaders in low light performance. Are some of the higher end Sony mirrorless cameras, they can pretty much basically see in the dark with those huge sensors they got in there. Like, they are really, really, really good at what they do. They really are. But with that being said though, folks, again, I wouldn't go past 5,000 or 6,000 ISO. Again, like right here, I'm shooting at about 1600, and I think it looks okay. But if I just go in here, and if I take it down to 800, I also think that looks okay. But just for the sake of this video here, I'm going to take it back up to 16 just to show you guys a little bit of a difference there. You know what I mean? But folks, for real, I really hope this might have helped some of you all out there. I'm so sorry that it took so long for me to get to this, but I got some stuff going on IRL, and of course, folks, my real life takes priority over any sort of streaming or YouTube stuff I got going on right now. So, but for real though, guys and gals, if you have any more questions about this stuff, do me a favor, let me know in the comments below. I'll answer your questions as soon as I see them or as soon as you post them, and I will catch you all over at twitch.tv/Hey It's Terry. I'm live there every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at about 8 o'clock p.m. Central Time, USA, as always, and I will see you all in the next one, okay? Take care, folks. See you around.